Hello,
Um,
where are you?
I am in a very full office.
Oh, it looked like you were in a basement. Hey, Raymond.
Yeah, they like the rustic approach, you know.
Yeah.
Um, what's about to say? Oh yeah, I just when I was looking for the Zoom URL, realised that the Discord event says to look at the pairing channel description for the. Um, so I don't know whether we should just include the Zoom link in the event in future, or whether we should put it in
That
the.
might be that might be a good idea because every time I have to go back to the pairing channel and find the Zoom link, even if it's always the same.
Okay, so I am going to risk sharing my screen.
Hello.
Good morning. Oh,
Hi, Anatoly.
I tell you what, let me spin up that MR while you introduce us to whatever topic you want to. Or Anatoly, did you have anything you want to dive into at all?
Well, there is a debt from the year ago, which is not moving because I have a ladder of distractions. I would say that doesn't happen. So the Drupal, the people from Drupal community asked for this property for CI minutes limit, I believe, a year ago, and I didn't have anything. Like any experience with Ruby or GitLab contributions. So I started to tell them that I will try to see how to add it to database. So that was easy to add it. Like I was in 2 months, I probably added it, but then tests started to fail, and this is where I broke because the tests were about delegated methods. So the delegated methods was not something that exists in Python. It was something that doesn't exist in Ruby. It exists only in Ruby on Rails. So the machinery, especially in tests, for testing that was really strange. Like you're duplicating the delegated methods in tests. So first you write delegated methods in the code, and then in tests you just hard code the lists. That was for me like strange because I thought that that's kind of not really testing the logic. It's got like more for testing the logic. There should be a method to get the delegated methods in Rails. So I started to do this, and when I got into the Ruby internals, when I understood that you only can get this method if you analyze the source, that was a rabbit hole for like half a year. Right now, I cannot merge DPR because it's become unreviewable because of this hacking method. It also started to fail in the like before that it was working, but now there's some properties in these global objects that is called projects, and these properties are making the breaking this method because it analyzes the source and it's breaking at some Ruby internals. So probably it was after the Ruby upgrade. So this method comes without tests and it's so flaky. So I thought that it's going to only be applied if I move it into a separate gem and like let people somehow, submit PR or MR for us, because I think it's pretty common issue to check if the method is delegated, especially if you're making these, enterprise edition or common edition stuff, which overrides some methods. I think it should be useful. So this is where I'm at the moment, but the thing is that it stops the Drupal community from managing the resources like for a year. So at this point, it's probably better to abandon it altogether, just hard code the test, but it's kind of, I wasted so much time on that. So it was not like a company time, but it's even worse. It's my own time. So, well, it's not so worse if it was company time, but still it's still in my head, so I cannot like just abandon it. I still cannot just close this original MR and that's it. So this is the long story.
So did you start building a gem or?
Well, I started it. I started to read on how to what is the gem, how to make a gem. Then I started to execute some command, and they started to fail. And then I understood that I had enough of Python packaging in my life, so I probably cannot like withstand Ruby packaging. So I couldn't like get myself to read this the specification how it's supposed to work because it didn't work for me like from the start. I understood that I need to write the gem spec file, and then there should be some documentation written. So somewhere there is a bits of code on that. So yeah. Remember, there was something that I need to build the gem. So writing spec is not the problem. I need something to build it, and it was Bundler, or it was some other utility. I'm not sure. So there was a classic way, and this was Bundler way.
I will find. So I actually created my first gem recently, so I can share a link in the chat to that. It's quite nice. The engineering productivity team built a CI template that kind of handles what steps has it got? I can't remember now, but if I look at a recent pipeline on that project, we'll be able to tell. So I probably manually added the RSpec and rubric up, but then the template kind of builds the gem, runs some kind of smoke test, whatever that does, creates a release, and pushes the gem to Ruby Gems as well. It's a bit GitLab specific, I guess, because it's assuming that it's a GitLab owned gem in the GitLab Gems project, or not project, sorry, group, which means it's got an access token, an API token that allows it to be published. But I think you could probably kind of reuse the majority of the kind of CI and also have a look at. I mean, this is, I think, as simple as a gem ever gets. There's a single kind of library that's basically doing some string comparison operations. And then there's a version file that allows you, when you modify that file, it kind of triggers the release. And yeah, so I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Well, yeah, but thought how to maintain the gem in the GitLab. So I'm not really like comfortable with publishing it to Ruby Gems, going through that process. I thought that there is a process that allows you to write the gem directly in GitLab repository with tasks separately for that gem.
Yes, you're right. I'm sure when I looked for the documentation, let me have a look at gem. Do you remember there being some documentation? And there was one for, a gem in the same repo, and one for building a gem in an external and publishing it. So yeah, I guess you were going down the internal route to have the gem as part of the project.
Yeah, right. So that was the.
Gotcha. I guess that makes it a bit simpler.
I also shared a gem that I created maybe 1 year ago. That's totally unrelated to GitLab internals. So that's maybe another thing that you could have a look at if you don't want to go to the GitLab route.
Yeah, probably I will take a look at the both like repositories, like to revisit that and then make more prepared, just to see what was the stumbling point on that. But I believe it was just the amount of reading that I need to do to understand what I need to do next. because like the GitLab documentation is not really straightforward if you don't know how to build gems.
Yeah, I know what I got confused with various bits, but it's weird because the gem documentation, like Ruby's own documentation, is a bit weird. I can't remember if it was Ruby or just Google that told me that you don't need to package the gem spec. You can, it's optional, but when you don't package it, like on Ruby gems, the homepage link and the version info, like all the information is kind of buggered, missing, like broken. So I don't really understand how they can say that it's optional to package the gem spec when without it, it doesn't, Ruby gems doesn't really work. So it's definitely something that the documentation in general can improve in.
So, all right, I'm not going to do this. Like right now, it's not really that I can do. Probably, well, because the reason my computer is starving on resources, and I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe some extension, and I'm not able to fix it right now. So if I execute the Visual Studio code, probably I will not be able to do anything at all. So it's better if we take another project to see what can be done for today. But
Okay.
yes, this problem with Drupal probably will be interesting to do on the next time.
Okay.
Because
sounds
like
fun.
the guys are waiting for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know it's a really interesting open source project, and definitely they kind of helped us out. Consulted, let's say, with the community forks, and they have a sort of similar challenge, although they have an entirely different solution at the moment. But the more that we can make them love the GitLab ecosystem and get rid of any of their customizations, the better. Marco, you had something or a couple of things potentially. Are you ready to dive into them? Or
Yeah, I have an MR that I mentioned about the splitting up the timelocks resolver into the resolver and the Finder service that I had some questions, and I just noticed that you actually answered those.
Oh, okay, but I forgot to ping you or something. So.
Yeah, well, I would I would still like to have a little look at this because yeah, I'm not too sure about what the best or what the right approach would be.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let me share my screen so that you
Yeah, that'd
can
help.
look.
Thank you.
Can you see it?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so this is the MR for splitting up the time logs resolver into the Finder service and the resolver using the service. And one thing that I did change when I did this migration, split up, however you want to call it, basically I noticed that there was an instance where things wouldn't work. Like this is the perfect example because when you provide a user filter, a username, it tries to first find a user from the username provided, um, and then pass that user um, to the query function that basically gets the user ID and set up the SQL query for getting the time logs. But this was not working when you provided no,
An invalid.
no, this was working because even if you provided Let me check. We should have a look at this one. For user. Oh, and you can see this. Let's change the sharing. You shouldn't be able to see the VS Code now.
Yep.
Okay, so basically the time log for user is setting up a where statement, passing a user. So this would work if even if you pass nil user, because this would basically create a query fetching time logs not related to any user.
Which does that violate the constraint? So it'd always return none, or
Yeah, basically this wouldn't work because a time log has to have a user, so this wouldn't really work. So I did change the zoom bar in the middle. I did change the logic a little bit, like we try to fetch a user from the username, and if we don't find that user, we return a record not found exception because we couldn't find the user with that username. And another place where I did something similar is when searching by group, because you have to provide the group ID, and from the group ID, it tries to find the group from that ID and pass that down to the scope. But this would actually break because when group is nil, the self and descendants would basically throw an exception because we have a nil object. And in this case as well, I went down the route of okay, you provided a group that doesn't exist, raise a record not found exception. These are the two different things that I did, but this change broke the existing specs for the resolver. Because if I
were we just testing an invalid scenario though, or
I'm not really sure because I'm not resolver spec. It's been a while, so let me run the spec to see. What?
you could try just doing as it says, I guess, bundle exec r spec and then the spec name. Nope.
I wonder if this has something to do with the other Ruby project that I'm working on locally. But this is working. Huh. I cannot run the spec. Prepending bundle except check for activated spec. You have already activated date 334, but your gem file requires date 323.
This is why I prefer like Docker containers for all this stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Although this is a gem, right? So this is real weird, real weird.
Yes.
Are you using? Oh, it's local. I usually like
Yeah.
on a Git pod. If you restart the workspace, you lost everything that is in your home directory after like you started
but
it, and that means install Gem, so you need to always do install after restoring the workspace. I need to fix that, like Git pod to one
I think
workspace.
we're losing.
With ASDF, it was another rabbit hole.
And
Like I found a great solution to skip ASDF at all. So these like crypto guys are making another thing to install dependencies that is project specific. And it's called T, and just needs more time to test it.
where are my tools?
Why don't you just like bundle, run bundle install and get it, fix everything?
I did try. It's not doing anything because I don't have anything.
Is there a way to like a bundle clean or something like that?
Maybe pristine?
So, or they have it for CI. Those gems, are those installed globally or they installed in the project directory?
That's a good question.
I think they're global, aren't they?
Yeah. Ruby version, it's the right one. Tools version.
Okay. Yeah.
Ruby 3.1.4. Yeah, the Ruby version is the right one.
You're not installed GCK yet, then, Marco?
I might give it a try, but it would take some time.
I would say that if there is a project for GitLab, they build every component as a container. And
GCK?
basically, no, it's not GCK.
Oh.
It's Kubernetes guys who are making GitLab running on Kubernetes. They're already packing all GitLab components in containers. And basically, the free teams doing the same way. The GDK, GCK, and Kubernetes teams are doing the same thing. They basically packing everything into containers, and they don't communicate between each other. It's funny stuff.
The
Because
GCK is
I would,
still. Go on.
yeah, I mean, GCK is not Kubernetes because it uses Docker Compose, but the Kubernetes guys are doing the great thing of already packing all the dependencies. So basically, you can have all these components with dependencies already in the container. But the problem is, how do you modify it? This is the problem. Right? How do you modify the code in the container?
Does Kubernetes not work in the same way as Docker, where you just mount volumes from the host, so to speak?
Yeah, well, Kubernetes is making it easy. You just throw your containers into the cloud, and the automatic system manages them. So the most confusing part from the start, if you throw your Kubernetes will deploy, it will automatically restart it if the containers goes down, and that means that your logs will be automatically rewritten if you're not like storing them anywhere. And that was so confusing, and that probably gave me like a month or 2 months of headache. And then I realized that it's not like manual process anymore. I'm not starting everything. Like Kubernetes taking care of everything automatically. I just throw it a state I want my cluster to be in, and it tries to bring the cluster to that state.
Yes, but Kubernetes needs the containers to be built.
Yes, and it's not for me. It's not clear how to develop in Kubernetes clouds. Like you still need access to your source code, so you need to find the container. You need to hack into that to like mount the source code to be accessible from your computer, and that's not how Kubernetes is designed to work. This is one of the problems
No,
with it.
I guess
Yeah.
you'd probably either run a Kubernetes cluster locally, which maybe somewhat defeats the point, or I don't know if you could somehow NFS mount the volume, but then I guess that'd be super slow with a project the size of GitLab.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I think there are solutions for that. I just was not. They're not just out of the box. So I'm not just found something who documents this process of development with Kubernetes. I would say like most GitHub repositories use Docker Compose or something like this for
yeah,
development.
yeah, yeah, and that's why the GCK I think was born, but there's just a couple of team members using it at the moment. So I know I've started poking around with it to see if it's something that can kind of be pushed a bit harder for mass consumption. Andrew started using it as well. I
I
believe.
would actually, instead like of conferences which are documenting how to, do existing stuff, I would actually read real conferences where people can discuss how to build like the new stuff, like how to make these contributions using Kubernetes easier, like to GitLab. So make a conference like for 3 days or for 5 days with Kubernetes guys, GDK, GCK, and try to see which are the missing parts from the Linux kernel. I don't know, like the stuff that makes it effortless for users to, start contributing without like, waiting for GDK to start up or like this dependencies coming out of sync. Because this is a really annoying problem. The people who are not being paid money, maybe they're like their time is more expensive. Maybe like it should be, I don't know, somehow saved. I'm
No,
not
no,
sure
no.
how.
It has pretty much come top of our agenda, to be honest, because we had a recent UX study on new contributors, which identified the fact that um, people were breaking their day job development environment by installing the GDK and yeah, just hitting various issues. So pretty much number one on our list is trying to figure out how to overcome this and make something which doesn't break, something that can be spun up more predictably, and ideally more quickly, definitely more quickly than a GDK install that takes a couple of hours. But debatably, Gitpod's already a reasonably good solution. Um, but yeah,
It still takes time to, like if you update the GDK inside the Gitpod, it starts rebuilding all these Postgres databases again. So yeah, it
yeah.
works. It's much better than trying to work on your own computer. But I would still, there is no thorough discussion up to the Linux kernel about what needs to be done there, because all the solutions are already on the plate, but no company are investing in them because company kind of blind to that lowest level of development.
Can I? I'm going to try and find an issue. You might have already commented on there, but if I can share an issue, if you've got any insights, because probably getting down to the kernel level is a bit beyond my comprehension. But I'd love it if you could share something. Let me find. Um,
I just Googled my issue, and the solution with most votes is run bundle clean force.
and is that what you just did, or?
No, I did bundle pristine because bundle clean force would remove every system jam that's not inside of the bundle.
And you don't really want to do that.
I'm not against it. It's but it's yeah, let's try. Maybe because the other project that I been working on is using maybe Rails 3.2 something else. Rails 7 and Ruby 3 point something else. Oh,
Why don't you use GDK Doctor?
because I didn't think about it.
Oh, because
Don't have-
I usually my go-to solution is GDK Doctor to everything on Gitpod.
Yeah, that's usually the right thing to do, but for some reason I didn't think about that
You're
today.
like me. You think of the complex, hard things first, and then the obvious, easy, simple solutions last.
Yeah, but the problem is that I have no idea what GDK Doctor is doing.
Yeah, and also well, I would actually have been pretty curious to see what the doctor's suggestion would have been. Okay, so we finally have the broken specs.
Finally,
Right.
it's broken.
So when on a project, it behaves like with a project expected to be an instance of.
Do you have AI in your instance to help with the code?
Code suggestions, yeah, I do have them.
Does it have code explanations? Because in my account, I don't have access to it. Like,
I don't know actually.
I've only seen code completion. I've not seen. It may well be possible. It might be one of the features that I haven't
yeah,
explored yet.
it worked one time. I was like really amazed, like when you can just cite text and ask it's what does this text mean, and it actually like explains you. But it doesn't work anymore. I will send you the documentation. Maybe
Awesome,
you
thanks.
can
Yeah,
see it.
I've done that in the UI, in the GitLab UI, but I've not done it in VS Code before.
When the start argument is after the end argument. This is a different error than
What's
before.
it complaining about?
Maybe it was not in the US code. Yeah.
And now I have the time log finder. My time. Validate arguments. This should.
Looking like it's not throwing the error, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually getting records back when it's expecting an error.
Yeah. Because. So
You said you weren't getting that before. I don't know if you want to just put a breakpoint inside that validation block and then just run that specific spec.
Yeah, I think was it only no to run only this spec.
Personally, I just put the line number when I run from the console.
True,
So
but this is inside a shared example. Let's see if that works.
okay, it is possible, but I'm not very. I don't really understand the syntax.
One test. There was a way. Office.
Oh, that's yeah, that's it, isn't it?
I think so. Let's try. Yes. Okay, we can try and see.
A breakpoint in that validating method.
Yes. What the heck is this output? That's it. Okay. Start time and time.
Yeah, so it's definitely the end time is before the start time, isn't it?
Yeah. So
Confident of that. Good.
next. Cleaned args. Okay, so
Object. Can you check object? Yeah, perfect. So next again, I guess.
yes, let me. Oh, the zoom bar is really frustrating.
What zoom bar? We don't see no zoom bar.
I do see it, and I don't want to. Next again. So if provide either one, but not both.
Oh, wait a minute. This isn't the method. This isn't the right method that we were supposed to put the breakpoint in, is it? This isn't the one that checks.
It's validate time difference.
Yeah.
This is called from
Or
nowhere.
even
It's called from nowhere because when I migrated,
you forgot to.
that was called from validate arguments, parse date time. Okay, times provide validate time difference. Oh, it's inside apply time filter, which is now inside of the finder. Okay. Validate time difference. Let's move it. It should by time. Validate time difference. It's provided. Okay. But this should raise argument error. It was before. And this is a raise GraphQL error, argument error. I guess we can do the same.
I mean, you don't really want to raise a GraphQL error from a finder, do you?
Oh, good point.
But let's just do that. Make sure the test passes, and then you can
Yeah.
you can figure out how you're gonna. You remove the breakpoint. I can't remember if you did or not.
No, I didn't remove it. Next. No, continue.
Perfect.
Oh,
So
they
now
both.
you've got thing. So you were saying another test was failing though. Is that magically started working now, or?
Yeah, another one was failing. So let's now this is out of the way. Let's see what the other. Oh, I still have the focus. Okay, let's see if that's yes. So now I'm returning the user error. Basically, the finder, if it doesn't find a user, this is going to return the error. Before, if we remove this one, this will pass. But I'm curious to see what Timelux would return when I give it a username that's not existing. Okay, which one passed? Group with a user. User found. Oh,
User found. Is that a method?
no, this is a variable set on this.
Oh, okay.
Because I guess this is something that I did set up 7 months ago. So it's, yeah, when the user doesn't exist, it's expecting to return an empty collection. So that is right.
But we can go further than that and expect the error, the exception.
Yes. Well, it won't break because it's not breaking already, because even if you pass a nil user to the for user scope, it's going to build a query checking, finding time logs for where the user is nil, which will be none. But
yeah, I mean,
but assume there's an error somewhere else and a time log is created and it's not related to any user. This would return that time log.
why did you comment that error on line of 38? Why did you remove that? Why did you comment that out?
So this didn't exist before when we
Yep.
had everything inside of the
Yep.
resolver. When I had a look, migrating things over, I found that there was an issue with the group, because if the group didn't exist, that would have that would break the API. But that would work if the username provided didn't exist, and it would return an empty time logs array. Now with my change, that's, I think, still going to return an empty array, but it also will also return an error stating that the username could not be found.
Well, Raise, I think, will, depending on if you're catching it in the resolver, Raise will actually throw an error as opposed to rather than return. You would need to return like I think we call it like a service response or something if you wanted, with a status, and then you could handle and sort of pass those statuses on to the GraphQL if you want to do it that way, or handle these errors, catch these errors, these exceptions.
Yeah, because
personally, if you look in, God, what would it be? One of the issue or CRM, some kind of CRM service. Let me see if I can find one. I'm definitely doing something where
but catching the error on the resolver might be a good solution, because we could have other issues anywhere else.
yeah, but sometimes you don't want to like catch random stuff, because that's the whole point of if you've got an exception, you want it to throw so that you're aware that there is an exception to the rule. I've just oh, you've opened it already, one step ahead of me. This is a scenario or an example of where we're returning a service response with success or error, and then the payload containing the data. So you could use this to pass back a success or an error to the consumer with the payload and any error messages. It might be something where we want to ask, I don't know who the experts would be, but some back-end engineers for some input. But
yeah, but this
I'm a fan of doing it because it's kind of abstracted, or whatever you want to call it, so you can consume this from like GraphQL or from REST API or from anywhere else, without having to kind of handle that.
Yeah, you're calling the service, and the service return this is not returning anything. This is just calling a mutation.
Yes, although it does return the issue, and if there were any errors.
Oh, that also returns the issue. Let me have a look again, because oh, okay, yeah, you have the payload.
Yeah.
So, okay, I see what you mean. Basically, the change the finder to return both the payload, which would be the result of the search, and the message for the error, so that we can show that on the, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sold on the idea. Clearly, there's several different approaches, but if you want to return an object, you basically don't want to have to handle exceptions. If you're going to write multiple different ways, maybe there's a way through the UI that's calling this method the time log finder. Maybe there's a GraphQL method that's calling the finder. Maybe there's a REST API.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to return a GraphQL error from the finder.
But even an error full stop, I don't think you want to throw an error and then have to catch, unless you did just sort of a weird generic catch and then rethrow the error, but wrap it in a GraphQL error. But that doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to see if there are other example in other finders. But yeah, I don't really see any issuable finder. This is a big one. I don't think there's any raise inside. Oh yeah. Well, okay. Use all issues. Yeah, I don't think they're using raise from finders. But what if there's an issue? Like if there's an issue on the finder params, they must have some places that they're doing that.
So my expectation is that maybe there's a possible assumption that the UI, if you're consuming it through, you're not using an API, you're doing it through the UI, that the UI prevents you doing something sort of impossible. Like
Yeah.
if you're selecting a group from a drop down, you can't select something that doesn't exist. Yes, obviously you could modify the payload and hack it and send a HTTP post and break it, but we shouldn't need to worry about that. So then you've only got the API to worry about. And then obviously,
Yeah, you're basically saying assume that the params passed to the finder will be right.
yeah,
And move all the checks one step above. Like keep all the time validation and stuff up above to the resolver in this case.
yeah, that's kind of how I think some of the other legacy stuff works. But I think that was probably where we were much more thinking, let's either build REST API or maybe GraphQL API, but mainly when we were still REST API. I think if we really want to be thinking about, I don't know, is abstraction the right word, but kind of,
yeah,
like where these responsibilities, I do think the finder is the right place to do that validation. But I guess you could just argue that you've just got to handle that service response and the relevant sort of errors in the same way in all of the consumers anyway. So maybe you're just moving a problem. You're not exactly solving the problem.
Yeah, but I mean, I kind of understand why we would be moving the checks one level above, like because the way that the error is presented to the user is different for REST APIs and for GraphQL. But finding the issue with the params provided, it's like rewriting the logic into different places. While if we build that on the finder, we can use the finder service and the checking logic is already built in.
Yeah, I agree that the finder is the right place for it. But just legacy in the past. I'm not sure that's been the approach, but you might want to search for service response.error or something like that, grep for it and see where it's used and whether or not what I'm suggesting is a good or a bad idea.
I don't think that's a bad idea, but I wonder if that's used inside of Finders because it's used for services, that for sure.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see the Finder as a service, if I'm honest.
I agree with you, but they're kind of separate.
Okay.
At least
Do
it's
we need a service that does nothing other than wraps the Finder? Or I wouldn't have thought so. But
that if that's a thing, I don't want to look at that thing.
well, why don't you do files to include and filter star_finder.rb?
Good point. Uh,
No, you can just do underscore because all the finders have underscore
okay.
finder in it. Yeah. That's it. No, damn.
But we do have
Let's be revolutionary.
yeah, that's one thing because that's the thing that makes more sense to me. So
I'm definitely I like the idea, but I think it would be a good idea to pitch it to a couple of people, couple of
yeah.
back-end engineers, and just before I send you down a dark alley.
That's definitely the thing that I will be doing. Like I'm going to make the change and then ping a couple of people to have a look before moving on too much.
Cool.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. At which point it's about time for both you and I to eat, I think. So
I guess so.
So much for us splitting it up, but at least we made a bit of progress and unblocked your broken Ruby.
Yeah, even though I think I'm going to break it again when I set up, because I'm pretty sure that now I have broken the other project.
Yes. Yeah,
but that's not an issue. It's some personal.
Well, let us know if you feel the need to spin up GCK tonight.
Do you use I mean, the project is in the GitLab, or is it's just another directory with all the files, but also Ruby?
It's a completely different path.
Yeah, for that reason, I would still try to propose installing all the gems locally. I had this in GDK, but it was, I believe, refused for some reason. Not sure what was the reason.
How do you, when you run bundle install, do you just tell it the path, or how do you achieve that?
When you run bundle, I'm not sure if it tells the path.
Well, I'm sort of asking you the question: how do you tell it to install the gems locally?
Yeah. There is a setting in bundle a file in the root that can tell you to install everything locally, and that was reverted, I believe.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay.
And maybe I will find the PR MR.
Cool.
Let me check. It was in the gem file, probably.
I know we do it where we cache gems in CI quite a lot. I think we do something like bundle config and set the path. So we could possibly just do it like that if you need to do it temporarily to get the project working. Yeah, hand in hand, side by side.
No, I can keep breaking both.
Yeah, here is the MR. I sending it into the Discord.
Oh, let me stop my.
Yeah, there is a MR about the bundler config.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and this bundle config is like it was said that people use it for tuning their own installation, but well, there was some discussion. I'm not sure. Like, maybe you have some arguments, maybe not. I'm not an expert, so I cannot like say if that breaks anything.
I'll have a look at that. That's interesting.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. So I guess I will try unbreaking the other project, setting up the bundle to work locally, and then do the same for GDK and see if that works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let us know how it goes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you both. Have a great day.
likewise.
Yeah.
See you next
Same
time.
to you.
Catch you later.
Bye bye.